Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and do a review of the Marius questions for students who may have been absent, or even if you were present but you had not read that far, to try to help students get ready for our upcoming test on this section. And then I'll do another one of these for St. Denis after we discuss that in class on Thursday, Friday of this week. All right, so this is your Google Classroom. No matter which class period you're in, they're the same. And I just want to call your attention to this important characters and places to know. I've pointed this out a few times in class, but I keep adding to this as we get to different sections of the story. And so this might really help you to decipher what it is that you need to know in each section and what's not important. Like here are all these names for the Friends of the ABC, and you do not need to know those individual names. You just need to know that they all have the same purpose, progress for France, and that's why they work together and talk to each other. These are all criminals, friends of the Thénardiers. You don't need to know each of those names, but it might help you as you're looking over those sections to understand who they are. This is the prison, La Force, that Thénardier and some of those criminals get sent to after they attempt to murder Jean Valjean. You know that several of those criminals, including Thénardier, eventually escape, either in the process of being taken to the prison or once they're there, and so on. So be sure to use this document as a tool. But that is not what I'm going to focus on today. I'm going to focus on this Marius study guide. So we went over the first section of this in class, the first page, and that's when some of you may have been absent. And so that's the part I want to focus on. And then the second page, I just kind of pointed out a few things, and we had time for questions and answers. And some classes asked a lot of questions, and some didn't. And I let that guide discussion. All right, number one, no one be able to describe the relationships between Pontmercy, Gillenormand, and Marius. There's a document in Google Classroom that tells you their relationships, and we've talked about it many times. And so hopefully you feel clear about those three. Marius is the child, the son of Pontmercy, and Gillenormand is Marius's grandfather. So Gillenormand and Pontmercy are son-in-law, father-in-law. Remember that Marius's mother, the daughter of Gillenormand, died in childbirth. Why is Marius raised by his grandfather? The simple answer is money. His grandfather does not like Pontmercy, can't stand him because they have political differences. And so Gillenormand says that there's no way he's going to let Pontmercy raise his grandson. And if he does, then there will be no inheritance for Marius. So Pontmercy feels he's doing the right thing by letting the grandfather raise the grandson because he knows that money can really make a difference in a person's life in France at this time, and he wants that for his son. Pontmercy loves his son so much that he's willing to give him up for what he thinks is best for him. Number three, describe Pontmercy's death and Marius's reaction to it. What is Marius given as his inheritance? And so Marius, remember, has really no connection with his father until his father dies, and he is summoned to come to your father's house. He's on his deathbed. By the time he gets there, his father has died. And Marius feels nothing because he has not had a connection with his father that whole time. And he puts crepe on his hat, which is a black ribbon, and that shows that he's in mourning. It was like a formal thing to do when someone in your family passed away. But he does not feel anything, and it doesn't really affect him. Pontmercy had nothing. He has no money. He lives very simply. He has a very small pension from the government from his time in the Napoleonic army, his work there, but he really doesn't have any typical inheritance to give. He leaves a note for Marius, And in the note, he says, "You can take my name, my title, which is Baron." So that's like an honorary title that was given to Pontmercy for his heroic actions. And he says, "I can give you my title. You should carry that on." And he also leaves him a request that should Marius ever come into contact with a man named Thénardier, he should do whatever he can for that man, because Pontmercy believes that after the Battle of Waterloo, Thénardier is the one who was stealing from him and pulled him out from that pile of bodies, and Pontmercy, in his stupor, thought that Thénardier had saved his life. And so he feels indebted to him, and he passes that debt on to his son and asks for a promise to please take care of this man if you should ever encounter him. Number 4, explain what Marius finally finds out that changes his views of his father. How does he find out the truth about his father's feelings for him? Why is it too late? And how does this discovery change Marius? And so Marius goes to church and has a seat, and Monsieur Mabeuf, this old man who helps with the church, steps up and says, "You're in my seat." So that's how they meet. And then through that interaction, Mabeuf tells Marius that his father would always come to see him as a boy in the church. Every week he would come to mass because he loved his son and he wanted to see him. But he would hide behind this pillar in the church because they were not allowed any contact. And Mabeuf tells him how much his father, Pontmercy, actually loved Marius. This is all brand new to Marius because he was kept from his father his whole life by his grandfather. Any letters his father had written were thrown away. They never reached Marius. And it's too late, unfortunately, to find that out because Marius's father has died. But it changes Marius in that he starts to look at his father in a new light. All he's heard about his father this whole time is what a terrible person he is from the grandfather, and how he's a rebel and he's a scamp and he's a criminal and he has no ethics. And this makes him think, okay, maybe that's not actually true. Number 5, what causes Marius to withdraw from the Gillenormands? What is he doing with his time, and what does his grandfather think he's doing? So the reasons I just said, the dishonesty between the grandfather and Marius is what causes Marius to feel betrayed and want to not be a part of that family anymore. So he goes out and he starts researching his father and finding out more about his father. What was he really like if he hasn't been told the truth all this time? What were his political views? What did he do? And he actually finds out that Pontmercy was a hero to the people, to those who wanted a republic, a government by the people, for the people. And so it's a completely different view of who this man is. So he's out researching, finding out more about his father. What his grandfather thinks he is doing is having an affair with a young woman, that he's going out. He's in his early 20s. He's hanging out with his friends. He's dating this woman or many women. And his grandfather's pretty happy about that. He wants him to live that life, have fun, be a socialite. And so he's happy to see this progression. He doesn't suspect anything. Number 6, what prompts Marius to get calling cards bearing his new name? What is his new name, and how is this change significant? So in those days, you would have a little card like a business card that you might give to someone so they could remember your name after you meet. And he gets his cards printed with Baron Marius Pontmercy. So he's taking the title that was given to him and his father's last name, essentially severing his ties with his grandfather with this card, like pledging his allegiance to his father more so than to his grandfather. Number 7, Marius is described as having an aversion to his grandfather. Why is this? This is on page 237. And aversion means you want to avoid something. Like if you drive by an accident, you avert your eyes, you look away so you don't see that. So what is causing him to turn away from his grandfather? And we've talked about that, I think. It is described on page 237, so you can take a look at that in more detail. 8. Why does Marius travel to Montfermeil? What does he find there? So he goes to Montfermeil, which is where Cosette was kept and where the inn of the Thénardiers is, because he's trying to find this man, Thénardier. Now he believes greatly in his father and he wants to carry out this promise to help the Thénardiers. What he finds is they're no longer there, they've moved on, and there's no sign of them. Number 9. What does Monsieur Gillenormand and Marius's aunt find in his room? What tips them off to his new life, studies, and loyalties? So, Marius's grandfather gets a little nosy, and so does his aunt. The elder, they call her the elder. She's the aunt who never got married, never moved out of her father's house. Now she's kind of like a housekeeper helper to her father. So they get nosy and they want to know, is he seeing a woman and who is it? And so essentially they start snooping around his room. And the cards and the letter from his father fall out of his coat pocket. And so then they know what he's been doing. And just like any child who keeps a secret from their parents, when whatever the secret is, when they find out that he's been researching his father and he has now loyalty to his deceased father, they feel betrayed. They feel like they gave everything to Marius growing up. He never wanted for anything, and he betrayed them with this. Number 10. After that, there's an argument, and you should definitely know the argument. It's a very good scene. It's on page 240. Around there is when it starts. You should know why each of them are angry. We've discussed that quite a bit. And you should know what happens at the end of the argument. Essentially, at the end on page 242, Gillenormand says, "Be off!" And he sends Marius away and kicks him out of the house. Now, Gillenormand loves his grandson, but remember, he's not good at showing it. And so in this moment of anger, he kicks him out. But then he turns to his daughter, Marius's aunt, and says, "I want you to send 60 pistoles, some form of money, every 6 months, and never speak to me of Marius again." So he's cutting off contact because he's so angry, but he still loves him and he doesn't want him to end up living on the streets. And so he's going to send him money and try to still take care of him from a distance. 11. Who are the friends of the ABC? What is their goal? You do not need to know all their names, but you do need to know what knits these different men together. So the friends of the ABC are discussed in the next few pages, and it goes on to page 247, where we find this line: "All these young men, diverse as they were, and of whom as a whole we ought only to speak seriously, had the same religion, progress." So religion meaning, what is it that they believe in? What is it that they're following? Progress. So they're very different men, but they are all students, either students of life or actual university students or educated men who have learned a lot about their country. They have some opinions about their country, and there's kind of a rebellion or a revolt stirring among them. Marius describes it when he starts joining these men as entering a mental wasp's nest. So they are just buzzing with information and opinion and discussion, and they meet either in a cafe or a bar, and they just talk and talk and talk and plan of how could France be better. They are not really on the side of the monarchy, the kings and queens, and they're not necessarily on the side of the republic, which was Napoleon. They are men who are unsatisfied with any form of government that has been placed before them, and they'd like to see something better. This is the first time that Marius ever hears people talking like this, that you don't have to accept exactly what's presented in front of you, that you could have a different idea or you could try to make your country better in a different way. And so this is really opening Marius up, his association with these men, into becoming a more mature young man, understanding more about the country in which he lives and how he can make change. All right, number 12. Marius has no money and no home. Know how he gets introduced to the friends of the ABC. Understand the internal conflict that arises in him on page 254. And so you should read these few pages, figure out how he even gets involved with them in the first place. And then on 254, Marius is torn between his political beliefs. He now doesn't know what to believe. There's the belief system he was raised with, monarchy with his grandfather. Then there's the belief system his father fought for, which was the republic. And now these young men are saying neither of those are the answer. So this just shows us the development of his character. 13. What does Marius do with the money that his grandfather has the ants send? And why does he do this? He sends it all back. Every time he receives this money, he sends it back because he is maybe a little stubborn and maybe determined to cut ties with his grandfather, and he's angry and he's proud. So he does not accept their money. 15. Who is Monsieur Mabeuf? Monsieur Mabeuf is the old man who told Marius about his father in the church. But they keep in touch, and he now becomes Marius's friend. So there's huge age difference between them, but they are good friends and one of Marius's only friends. 16. How have Marius's political views evolved by page 266? What is his political party at this point? You can read that. 17. What does Marius do for his neighbors, the Jondrettes? So that you know that the Jondrettes are the Thénardiers. Everyone is now in Paris together. Jean Valjean, Cosette, Marius, the Thénardiers, and Javert. Javert is working in the police department of Paris. So all of our main characters have come into one city now. And that includes the Thénardiers, who were probably running away from debt collectors, crimes they had committed. And so, as a lot of criminals do, when they moved to a new place, to this big city, they also changed their name. They're living under an alias. But if you read the description, you know that it is the same family. Marius at one point is approached by his landlady. Oh, by the way, if you don't know this, Marius and the Jondrettes live next door to each other, side by side in these apartments in the old Garbeau house. And the old Garbeau house, coincidentally, is the same house that Jean Valjean and Cosette lived in when they first came to Paris, before Javert found them, before there was the race through the streets, before they escaped into the convent. Jean Valjean and Cosette are living in the convent at this point. So the landlady at the old Gorbeau house comes to Marius and says offhandedly, "Oh, yeah, the people next door to you are going to be kicked out because they don't pay their rent." And he very mechanically and without thinking, just instinctively says, "Well, here's some money. Pay their rent and don't tell them who did it." He wants to stay anonymous in this donation that he makes. Okay, so just remember that that happens at one point. 18. Who are Mademoiselle Lenore, which means black, and Monsieur Leblanc, which means white? This is Cosette because she wears black all the time. And this is Jean Valjean because he has that white head of hair. And so the people in the town start to see them venturing out from the convent. Quite a bit of time has passed that they've lived there. And in fact, 8 or 9 years have passed since they first got to the convent, so some time has passed. People in town don't know who they are as they start to walk in this beautiful park along the river called the Luxembourg, and the two of them, this is like a daily outing and a walk from the convent, and they sit on the same bench every day. And so people call them by these names because they don't know who they are, and Marius also calls them by these names. 19. Describe how Marius first sees Cosette. How does his view of her change through time from his first impression to later on? By the way, I don't know if I have a question for this, but we said that Marius sends back the money. He's about 20 years old at this point. He sends back the money to his grandfather. He does have a job, and his job allows him very few things his pay. He can pay his rent, he can pay for food. Once in a while, he'll buy a shirt if he needs to replace some clothing, and then he has very little money left over. He feels that he is rich, however, because he is young, he's independent, and he's free. And so you should know how Marius feels about being poor, what his reaction is to it. And I believe our last question in this study guide is to know the contrast between that and how the Thénardiers deal with being poor. It's two very different ways to react in life to your circumstances, and Hugo is making a point about that. At this point on page 268, Marius does not have nice clothes. He has two suits, one that is good and one that is everyday, and basically the good one stays in the closet. He has three shirts, one at the cleaners, one on himself, and one in the closet for the next day. So he really is looking kind of shabby. But on page 268, it says, at the time of his most wretched poverty, he noticed that girls turned when he passed. And with a deathly feeling in his heart, he fled or hid himself. He thought they looked at him on account of his old clothes and that they were laughing at him. The truth is that they looked at him because of his graceful appearance and that they dreamed over it. So he is actually very attractive to these girls, even though he doesn't have fancy clothes. This on page 268 is where he starts to see Cosette as he's going out also to walk along the Luxembourg. We're on number 19 here. Okay. And so on page 268, he talks about them. He says, the other was a little girl whom he saw very often and whom he never looked at. For more than a year, Marius had noticed the man and a girl quite young, nearly always sitting side by side on the same seat at the most retired end of the walk. The man is about 60, so Jean Valjean is about 60. His hair was perfectly white. The girl is about 13 or 14, and this is how he describes her on 269. He says that she looked puny, to the extent of being almost ugly, awkward, insignificant, yet promising, perhaps, to have rather fine eyes. So when he first sees Cosette, he really does not think much of her. She's a little girl. She, he says she's basically ugly. She's insignificant. Okay. And then on page 270, a year passes that he sees them every day at the Luxembourg. And it says the second year, he went straight to his walk, and it seemed to him that it was no longer the same girl who was sitting next to Jean Valjean. The woman whom he now saw was a noble, beautiful creature with all the most bewitching outlines of woman, at the precise moment at which they are yet combined with all the most charming graces of childhood, that pure and fleeting moment which can only be translated by these two words, sweet 15. In 6 months the little girl had become a young woman. That was all. Nothing is more frequent than this phenomenon. There is a moment when girls bloom out in a twinkling and become roses all at once. Yesterday we left them children. Today we find them dangerous. That last part is on page 271. So, but he still is not attracted to her. If you look on page 272, it says, she looked at Marius with indifference. She doesn't care about him. He thought no more of this girl now that she was handsome, pretty, than he had thought of her when she was homely. So he just notices, oh, she grew up. He doesn't think anything of her. But then on the bottom of page 272, all of a sudden, their glances met. He notices her. She notices him. Everything changes in a moment. On page 273, it says, there is a time when every young girl looks thus. Woe to him upon whom she looks. If a girl looks at you like that, watch out. And so he's affected. And we know he's affected by Cosette because on page 274, he starts dressing up. He cares about how he looks. He's looking for her now on the Luxembourg. He is interested in her. He wants to see her every day, and he gets worried if there's dust on his boots, and she's going to see that. And so he's now paying attention to her. We find out on 277 that he's actually now in love, because it says in the middle, he felt as though his brain were on fire. She had come to him, meaning that she had walked Jean Valjean across the Luxembourg in front of Marius. Now remember, they haven't said a word to each other. They don't know each other's names. This is all happening from afar. She seemed more beautiful than she had ever seemed before. So he is just entranced with her. And he does some interesting things, as our classes discussed, flirting. He kind of hides behind trees and peeks out and looks at her, and sometimes he hides behind his book. So there's no talking going on. They do not introduce themselves, and so know that part, that they have not officially met. On page 278, however, Marius makes the decision to follow them home one day. He wants to know who they are and where they live. He wants to know more about Cosette, get closer to her. And it says on 279, Monsieur Leblanc passed his daughter in to the garden and stopped, and before entering himself, turned and looked steadily at Marius. And then Marius asked the porter the next day when Jean Valjean and Cosette don't come out walking, "Where are they?" And the porter said, "They moved. Don't know where they went. They moved." And so he's just lost her. And we had some conversations in class about why Jean Valjean would go to such lengths to keep Cosette away from Marius. It could be being a protective father. Some of our students said because Jean Valjean is still in jeopardy of being arrested by the police. And so maybe he thought this was a police officer following them. But our main feeling is that Jean Valjean is not ready to share his daughter with anyone. And he's not ready to lose that fatherly connection he has with her. And so he does not want her to be interested in young men or to meet this young man. And so they just move, they're gone. Number 22. These are pages I told the class that you could skip. It's not that it's not a good part of the book, but it is complicated and it's maybe not necessary for your first reading through of the book. If someday you decide you love this book, you want to read it again, maybe you want to go into more depth in certain parts. This is just about the types of men that there are in society. So this is Hugo philosophizing. And then it's about rulers who have ruled over Paris and what their effect was on, or excuse me, over France and what their effect was on the country. So as I said here, do not spend too much time on this or skip it altogether. Okay, 23. Recall the interaction between the Jondrette girl and Marius. Why does she come to see him? So this is Eponine. And Eponine stops into Marius's apartment and she's looking for money. They found out that Marius had paid their rent before, so she's back to ask for more money. Her father probably sent her there. Eponine, remember, is one of the Thénardier's daughters, and we only knew her when she was young. Well, here she is as a teenager. And she's an interesting character in that, she's extremely poor. It talks about her mouth being open and sunken. She has some of her teeth gone. Her eyes are dull. She has big, crevices, holes under her collarbones because she's so thin. She's wearing a chemise, which is like a slip, and it's ripped in places. And she doesn't seem to be aware of her nakedness in front of Marius or how revealing this slip is. She is about 16. But it says the remnant of her beauty is already dying out. She's lived a very hard life. And so she brings this note from her father. Eventually, she tells Marius that she can read and write, but the thing she writes is significant. We get the feeling that she couldn't write a whole letter. She's not that literate, but she knows how to write this phrase on the top of 288. It says the Cogniers are here, and that means the cops are here. And knowing the family she comes from, maybe she had been taught to write that specific line to protect her parents who are criminals, right? So there's a lot of flirtation that goes on in this scene. Marius is not interested, but she is flirting. And she gives us an idea on 289 of what the Thénardier's life has been like since Montfermeil. She says, "The other winter we lived under the arches of bridges. When I thought of drowning myself, I said, no, it's too cold." So she has lived such a desperate life that she thought about killing herself. They lived outside, right? They were homeless. And so it's been a rough road for this young woman. On pages 290 to 291, this is number 24, there is the explanation of our title, Les Miserables. And it's not going to be enough in future assessments for you to just say Les Miserables means the miserable people. You have to know more of what Hugo means by this title, and you need to read those 2 pages. We read those out loud in class. So be sure that you read 290 to 291, know the purpose of the book and the title. Okay. On the bottom of 291, Marius is berating himself, he's blaming himself because he has not taken better care of his fellow man, the Jondrettes next door. And he's been so wrapped up in his infatuation with Cosette and himself and growing himself as a person that he didn't even notice that he was living next to people who are barely surviving and truly are miserable. So he's blaming himself for not being a better man. He notices in the wall between their apartments, there's a hole way up high, and he can look through the hole into their apartment. And so he does that with the intent of finding out, how do these people live? What are they like? And then that leads to our next part. Why does Marius go to the police? What plan does the inspector devise with Marius? Who is the inspector? So I'm not going to go through this whole attempted murder scene with you. There's an attempted murder that starts on page 292, but you need to know what happens. You need to know that Marius goes to the police because he overhears the Thénardiers saying they're going to kill Jean Valjean and possibly Cosette. So understand how all that comes together next door to his apartment. The inspector, who is Javert, gives Marius 2 pistols, not to shoot anybody, but as signaling devices. And he says, at the moment when the crime is about to be committed, you're looking through your little peephole, fire the pistol and we will come. The police will come in at that time and stop it. Okay. But then on 27, what keeps Marius from doing that in that moment? So Jean Valjean is in the room. This is the father of the woman whom Marius loves. And he's so excited because she has walked in next door by coincidence. And so he's found her again. He hasn't seen her. He's been down and out because he has not been able to find this woman again. So there she is. That's her father. Her father is going to be killed by the Thénardiers, but at some point in this interaction, uh, Thénardier turns to Jean Valjean and says, "Don't you know who I am? Don't you remember me? I'm Thénardier." Well, then Marius is stuck. He has a moral dilemma because he has a promise to his father that he will help this man, Thénardier, if he ever sees him. But he doesn't want the father of the woman he loves, Jean Valjean, to be killed. And so he doesn't know what to do. He's stuck in that moment. 28, you need to know what's going on in that room. Why are the Thénardiers so angry? This goes beyond the relationship they have with Jean Valjean and Cosette. That's part of it. They're angry that Cosette, whom they treated like a slave, is now dressed better, fed better, treated better, has had a better life than their own daughter. So there's a lot of jealousy there. There's a lot of bitterness about that. But they're angry because they're poor. They're angry because there is such a disparity between people who have and the have-nots in their society. And all that anger, hunger, pain, bitterness, they're going to take out on Jean Valjean and Cosette in this moment. 29. In this time, Thénardier makes Jean Valjean write a note. What is in the note? It's basically a note trying to lure Cosette back to the apartment. So it's a note basically saying, "Come back here to be with me." And they want to kill Cosette as well. So he gives them a fake address. They figure that out. Then he's in bigger trouble. Number 30, at one point, Jean Valjean takes what they're calling a chisel. I kind of think of it as a fireplace poker that's been in the red hot coals. They take that chisel out, and Jean Valjean takes it and puts it across his arm and burns himself. And then he throws the chisel out of the window. So the question is, why would he do that? I think he does that because he foresees that they're going to try to torture him and hurt him. And this is his message to them to say, you can't hurt me. And if you, I will do, there's nothing you can do that will make me bring my daughter here. There's nothing you can do to me. I would, withstand all of this pain. I'm not going to put her in jeopardy. And then him throwing it out of the window is because he's not looking for violence. He's not looking for a fight with the Thénardiers or all these criminals who have now come out of the woodwork and are also in the room. He is not going to start the fight. So he had a weapon in his hand. right? He has the chisel in his hand. He could have done damage with that, but he throws it out of the window because he's trying to keep this room peaceful. Explain how Valjean gets away. I'm not going to tell you that part. You have to read that, know that whole scene. And then we've talked about examining the last question here, that Marius and the Thénardier family are both very poor. How are they treated differently as characters, and what message is Hugo trying to send us about how we react to situations in life, or how people can react? All right, I sincerely hope that this helped, especially if you've been absent. If any of these are still unclear, you can always ask questions before we start the test. Your test on the Marius and St. Denis section is on Tuesday or Wednesday, the 15th or 16th. Thank you.